Have you ever stopped to consider the hidden sacrifices your parents might be making for the well-being of your family? Imagine dedicating the precious years of retirement, the golden years meant for rest and personal fulfillment, to raising grandchildren, only to feel overlooked, unappreciated, and taken for granted in return. This is the reality that many aging parents face, yet it often goes unnoticed. In this story, we delve into the compelling journey of James and Margaret, a retired couple who left their serene and fulfilling life in the countryside to support their son David and his wife Sarah, who were overwhelmed by the demands of modern life and parenthood. As we explore their experiences, we'll witness the emotional and physical toll of what can only be described as invisible dependence. We'll uncover the challenges faced by elderly caregivers who, despite their own limitations, selflessly step in to help their families. And we will extract meaningful lessons on how to foster healthier, more respectful family relationships. Stay with us until the end of this story to discover how to recognize and avoid these situations in your own life. By doing so, you can ensure that both you and your loved ones enjoy the mutual respect, happiness, and independence that every family deserves. These essential insights could completely reshape your perspective on family roles and responsibilities, offering a fresh understanding of what it truly means to care for and honor your parents. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any of our thought-provoking and insightful videos. Now, let's dive into the story. William Clark, 72 years old, has lived a life full of dedication and hard work. For over 30 years, he and his wife Margaret both worked as educators, William as a high school teacher and Margaret as a primary school teacher. They both retired 5 years ago and decided to spend their retirement years in a peaceful and serene way. Their only child, Daniel, now married and settled in the city, was busy with his career, and William and Margaret had always looked forward to spending their golden years quietly, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. After their retirement, they moved to the rural countryside in Vermont, where they could live out their dream of growing vegetables, tending to flowers, and raising chickens and ducks. It was a peaceful life, one they had always envisioned. The quiet mornings, the sound of birds chirping, and the simplicity of their everyday routines brought them joy and contentment. Life was calm, fulfilling, and full of quiet pleasures. However, everything changed when Daniel and his wife Claire announced that they were expecting a baby. It was an exciting time for the couple, but it also meant big changes were coming. Both Daniel and Claire worked long hours, Daniel as an architect and Claire as a manager at a marketing firm, leaving them little time or energy to care for a newborn. The couple had no family nearby to help with childcare and were struggling to figure out how to manage it all. William, wanting to help, suggested that Daniel hire a nanny to take care of the baby, knowing how much work it could be for young parents. But Daniel, being cautious with money and feeling uneasy about entrusting his child to someone else, didn't agree. Instead, he suggested that his parents move back to the city to help with childcare. While William and Margaret were reluctant to leave the peaceful countryside they had grown to love, they understood the need and agreed to return to the city. They made it clear, however, that their return would be temporary. Once their grandson started kindergarten, they planned to go back to their home in Vermont and resume their rural lifestyle. Upon their return to the city, William and Margaret found themselves taking on the responsibilities of raising their young grandson. They took care of his daily needs, from diaper changes to bedtime stories, and managed household chores like grocery shopping, cooking, and cleaning. Meanwhile, Daniel and Claire were largely hands-off, relying on takeout for meals and seldom helping around the house. The constant pressure of managing both their own lives and their son's household began to take a toll on William and Margaret. They felt increasingly frustrated. Though they worked tirelessly, the couple continued to put their all into supporting Daniel and Claire. They used their savings to make sure their family was comfortable, but it wasn't long before they felt their sacrifices were being taken for granted. One of the most significant issues arose when Claire, who worked in a far-off town, suggested buying a second car to make commuting easier. Since Daniel and Claire were not able to afford it, they turned to William and Margaret for help once again. Despite their financial struggles and growing frustrations, William and Margaret never stopped giving. They loved their son and grandson dearly, but they also began to wonder if they were being asked to give more than they could handle. After much discussion, William and Margaret, knowing that they had worked hard to save throughout their lives, decided to withdraw a portion of their pension to help their son Daniel and his wife Claire buy a new car. They took out $3,500, which was a significant amount of their savings, and handed it over to Daniel to help with the purchase. However, their generosity was met with disappointment. Daniel and Claire, rather than expressing gratitude, complained that it was too little, suggesting they needed a more expensive model. William, who had always been cautious with money and knew how hard they had worked for every dollar, told his son, "This is our hard-earned money. If this isn't enough, you'll have to find another way. We don't have anything more to give." Reluctantly, Daniel and Claire agreed to add some of their own funds to buy the car they wanted. This exchange left William and Margaret feeling disrespected and exhausted, but they tried to push those feelings aside, convincing themselves that they were doing this for their family. As time passed, their grandson Samuel grew older. Now over 3 years old, William discussed once more with Daniel the idea of returning to their peaceful life in Vermont. Once Samuel started kindergarten, they had made it clear from the start that their return to the city would be temporary, but Daniel and Claire had other plans. Claire, whose job required a long commute, said she couldn't manage to pick up Samuel after school, and both she and Daniel insisted that they needed William and Margaret's help for a little longer. Reluctantly, William and Margaret agreed once more to stay, putting their desires aside for the sake of their son and grandson. Samuel, now a curious and active toddler, was always running around full of energy. William and Margaret, though still strong in their love and devotion, were aging and often found it difficult to keep up with him. The constant care and energy required to watch over the young child began to take a physical toll on them, but they didn't complain. They simply did what they always had done, gave selflessly for the good of their family. When Samuel finished kindergarten and was about to enter primary school, William saw this as the perfect opportunity to revisit the idea of returning to Vermont. However, Daniel, still caught up in his work, made another request. "Since you both are retired teachers, we really need your help with Samuel's homework once he starts school. Claire and I are so busy with work, we can't do it all." Once again, William and Margaret put their own desires on hold and agreed to stay and assist their grandson with his studies. 3 years later, when Samuel was in 3rd grade, an unexpected and heartbreaking event occurred. One afternoon, while William was waiting to pick up Samuel from school, Margaret, who had been walking home, tripped and fell in the street. A kind passerby rushed to her aid and took her to the hospital. William, frantic with worry, immediately called Daniel to inform him of the accident. But instead of rushing to the hospital, Daniel told him, "I'm sorry, Dad, but I'm working overtime. I can't come right now." If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you're still here with me. With no other choice, William had to take Samuel to the hospital himself. Upon arriving and seeing his wife lying in a hospital bed, an overwhelming wave of sorrow and frustration swept over him. He couldn't hold back his tears as he sat beside her, reflecting on the years that had passed. Nearly a decade spent living with his son and daughter-in-law, shouldering the responsibilities of the household, and giving everything they had, all the while relying on their modest pensions. Even the costs of Samuel's kindergarten fees, extracurricular activities, and other expenses had been covered by William and Margaret. Yet when Margaret needed them the most, neither Daniel nor Claire could be bothered to visit. They used the excuse of being too busy with work, and in that moment, William realized just how much they had been taken for granted. His heart was heavy with the weight of the years of sacrifice. He finally saw the stark reality of his situation. He and Margaret had spent their golden years caring for their family, but in return, they had received little respect or appreciation. The sacrifices they made for their son and grandson had gone unnoticed, and now, in the face of an emergency, they were left to fend for themselves. A moment of anger followed, one that would lead to a decisive change. As William sat beside his wife in the hospital, he couldn't help but reflect on all the years of sacrifice they had made. He thought back to the times when their son, Daniel, and his wife, Claire, would rush home at the slightest hint of illness in Samuel, their grandson. Every small cold or fever would send them into a panic. But now, when it was Margaret who had fallen and was in the hospital, there was no rush, no urgency, just excuses and empty promises. The more William thought about it, the angrier he became. He realized that everything he and Margaret had given, years of hard work, selfless care, had been met with indifference, even contempt. Their sacrifices had been truly unworthy, giving so much and receiving so little in return. The week they spent in the hospital was a time of deep reflection for William. While Margaret rested, he took on the task of caring for her, arranging their belongings and making sure everything was in order. He couldn't stop thinking about the years that had been lost. He finally made up his mind. As soon as Margaret was discharged, they would return to their quiet life in Vermont and never again live with Daniel and Claire. When the day came for Margaret's discharge, despite Daniel and Claire's objections, they packed their things and prepared to leave. Daniel called, trying to convince them to stay, but William, feeling a surge of determination, stood firm. "We've done enough," he told his son. "It's time for us to live our lives for ourselves now." The moment they arrived back in Vermont, William and Margaret felt a weight lift off their shoulders. It was as if the years of stress and exhaustion had been washed away by the calm of their peaceful hometown. For the first time in many years, they could breathe easily again. Their bodies, which had ached from years of tending to their son and grandson's needs, finally felt at ease. The constant worrying, the caregiving, the physical demands of life in the city had taken their toll. It had been draining, but they had carried on because they thought it was the right thing to do. Now, back in their small, quiet house, the couple was free from the unspoken expectations of their son and daughter-in-law. William reflected on how, over the last decade, they had been the ones to shoulder all the responsibilities at home. They managed the household chores, the finances, and even Samuel's school activities, all while Daniel and Claire continued to focus on their busy careers. In return, they had received nothing but a sense of dependence from their son. Though Daniel would occasionally say how much he appreciated them, William knew it wasn't genuine respect. It was simply the invisible weight of reliance that Daniel had placed on them, without ever truly acknowledging their sacrifices. William and Margaret had given everything for their family, but now they realized that their happiness and well-being had to come first. They were no longer willing to live in a situation that drained them emotionally and physically. With their decision to return to Vermont, they began the process of rediscovering themselves. Slowly but surely, they were reclaiming the peace and fulfillment that had eluded them for so long. 2 stories of elderly parents. 1. Mrs. Linda Harris, the exhausted caregiver. Mrs. Linda Harris, 70 years old, had been living in Washington, D.C. for nearly a year, helping her children care for their 2 young grandchildren. Her son and daughter-in-law both worked demanding sales jobs, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. Mrs. Harris, who had always been a devoted mother and grandmother, found herself thrown into the whirlwind of city life and caregiving for her grandchildren, which was taking a toll on her health. Every day, her routine began at 6 a.m., when she would prepare breakfast for the youngest grandap. Letting them watch TV is bad for their health. The arguments became more frequent, and she didn't feel like her role in the family should revolve solely around raising her grandchildren. She felt it was time for her to take a step back and let her children take more responsibility for their own families. 3 lessons learned. The danger of invisible dependence. The story of Mr. William Harris sheds light on a quiet yet pervasive issue that many elderly parents face, an issue that is not often talked about but affects countless families. Mr. Harris, after decades of hard work and sacrifice, finds himself in a situation where, despite his unwavering support, both their well-being and the health of their relationships were at risk. Helping their children was a natural and loving gesture, rooted in a deep sense of responsibility and care. But over time, Mr. Harris began to feel that his acts of kindness, whether it was picking up groceries, caring for his grandchildren, or offering financial help, were no longer seen as generous gestures. Instead, they became unspoken obligations. His children, especially his daughter, began to expect his help regularly, and what had started as a kind act grew into a one-sided arrangement. Mr. Harris found himself caught in the role of a constant caregiver, with little regard for his own needs. As the strain on his health and emotional well-being increased, Mr. Harris and Margaret realized that they needed space. They joked about needing a vacation from the family, but soon realized that a permanent separation was necessary for their mental and physical health. Their solution was simple. They moved to a smaller, quieter town about 2 hours away from their children. This decision wasn't born from a lack of love, but from the need to prioritize their happiness and well-being. Living separately allowed them to protect their autonomy and avoid the constant feeling of being on call. They could still help when needed, but the distance gave them the space to recharge and focus on their own needs. The balance they found was crucial to their well-being. They learned that healthy relationships require balance, giving and receiving in equal measure. In their new home, they were able to engage in activities they enjoyed, whether it was gardening, taking walks, or joining local clubs. Their lives were enriched by new friendships and social circles, giving them a renewed sense of purpose. For elderly parents, establishing boundaries isn't just about physical space, it's also about emotional space. It's about finding a balance between being there for your children and being there for yourself. Recognizing that while you love your family deeply, you can't pour from an empty cup is essential. Prioritizing your own well-being is not selfish. It's necessary for maintaining healthy, fulfilling relationships with those you care about. By setting clear boundaries, elderly parents can protect their peace, enjoy their retirement years, and continue offering support without feeling overwhelmed or unappreciated. Another crucial lesson is the importance of clear communication of expectations. For elderly parents like Mr. Harris, one of the most significant challenges is ensuring that both they and their children are on the same page, especially when it comes to caregiving duties. Although many parents instinctively want to help when their children ask, it's vital to have an honest and open discussion about what they are able and willing to do. Without clear communication, parents can quickly find themselves overwhelmed, burdened by responsibilities that weren't initially part of the plan. For Mr. Harris, this became apparent when his daughter Jennifer asked him and Margaret to help care for her 2 young children while she and her husband worked full-time. At first, the request seemed reasonable, a natural request from a loving parent. But as months passed, Mr. Harris began to feel the lines between helping out and taking over were starting to blur. The task of caring for his grandchildren gradually became a more permanent fixture in his daily routine, rather than the occasional favor he had expected. Though he loved spending time with his grandchildren, Mr. Harris and Margaret had worked hard throughout their lives and had saved for their retirement. Their golden years were supposed to be about enjoying life together, taking trips, joining local clubs, and relaxing at home. Instead, their lives were becoming consumed by caregiving, and the pressure was beginning to take its toll. The turning point came when Mr. Harris realized they needed to have a serious conversation with their children about their limits. This conversation was not easy for him. He didn't want to disappoint his children or seem like he was abandoning them, but he understood that if they didn't establish clear boundaries, he and Margaret would continue to be stretched too thin. The conversation was candid but respectful. Mr. Harris explained to Jennifer that while they were happy to help with the grandchildren, they could no longer commit to watching the kids 5 days a week as they had been. He emphasized that they were both in their late 70s, and keeping up with the energy of young children was more challenging than it had been in their younger years. He also made it clear that they still wanted to be involved in their grandchildren's lives, but needed to balance their time with activities that were fulfilling for them as individuals and as a couple. To their surprise, Jennifer was understanding. She hadn't realized the extent to which her parents were feeling overwhelmed, and she appreciated their honesty. The conversation between Margaret and William Turner and their daughters Emily and Jessica ended on a positive note. with everyone agreeing to a new caregiving arrangement that better suited Margaret and William's needs. They decided that while they would still be involved in their grandchildren's lives, they would do so at a pace that felt comfortable for them. This exchange highlights the importance of clear and open communication when it comes to caregiving responsibilities. Elderly parents must feel empowered to set boundaries without the fear of guilt or resentment. Acknowledging their limitations, whether related to health or simply personal preference, and communicating those limits respectfully fosters mutual understanding and respect. Through this process, parents can ensure that caregiving doesn't become an overwhelming burden, as it had for William and Margaret. Clear communication not only establishes expectations but also helps preserve the integrity of family relationships, allowing them to thrive in a healthier, more balanced way. One of the critical lessons that William and Margaret learned was the need for early planning for old age. Planning for retirement often doesn't consider the complexities of aging until it's too late, but starting early can help prepare for the challenges ahead. Despite initially making thoughtful plans for their retirement, William and Margaret found themselves caught off guard when their daughter, Jennifer, asked for help with childcare. While they were happy to assist at first, the favor began to feel more like an expectation, gradually consuming their time and energy. Their retirement, which they had envisioned as a time for relaxation and self-care, was now overshadowed by the demands of caregiving. Looking back, William realized that the lack of clear boundaries at the start was a major factor in the shift of their plans. Had they been more assertive about their limits when Jennifer first asked for help, they might have been able to maintain their original retirement goals. Instead of becoming full-time caregivers, they could have hired professional childcare services, allowing them to stay involved with their grandchildren while still preserving their independence. This situation served as a wake-up call for William and Margaret, highlighting the importance of planning not just for financial security and retirement, but also for the emotional and logistical aspects of aging. A thoughtful approach to retirement should include discussions about time management, boundaries, and how to stay engaged in family life without compromising personal well-being. For other retirees, William and Margaret's experience offers a valuable lesson. Retirement isn't just about finances. It's about emotional well-being, personal boundaries, and maintaining a sense of self. Planning ahead and being honest with family about what kind of support is feasible can help retirees maintain control over their golden years, allowing them to enjoy the life they've worked so hard to achieve. As people enter their retirement years, the lesson becomes clear. Elderly parents must prioritize their own well-being and happiness above all. After decades of selfless sacrifice, they've earned the right to enjoy their golden years. Take, for example, Elizabeth and Robert Miller, who after years of raising their children Sarah and David, began to realize that their efforts, though deeply appreciated, were no longer as essential. Sarah and David were adults with their own families, and Elizabeth and Robert had spent most of their lives supporting them, financially, emotionally, and physically. Yet, as they entered their 70s, they started to feel drained and unable to enjoy the retirement they had imagined. Recognizing this, the Millers had an important conversation with their children, Sarah and David, explaining that while they were happy to offer support, they needed to focus on their health and happiness. Elizabeth began painting again, a passion she had set aside years ago, and Robert joined a local tennis league. They also started to travel more, rekindling their relationship as a couple. This newfound freedom allowed them to rediscover their passions and create a fulfilling routine focused on their own needs. The Miller story teaches that when children become adults, it is not only acceptable, but necessary for parents to step back and allow their children to take on more responsibility. This shift is not about abandoning their children, but about creating space for both parents and children to grow independently. By stepping back, parents not only protect their mental and physical health, but also encourage their adult children to develop the resilience they need to navigate their own lives. Prioritizing self-care and independence doesn't mean parents stop caring. On the contrary, it allows them to offer support in a sustainable, healthy way. By setting these boundaries, Elizabeth and Robert ensured that they could continue to have positive relationships with their children without sacrificing their happiness. The most profound lesson from Margaret and William Turner's story is the realization that true parental love often means letting go. After spending a lifetime providing unwavering support, parents must recognize that their adult children now have their own responsibilities. For Margaret and William, this shift was emotional, but necessary. They had always believed it was their role to ensure their children's happiness and success. But as they reached their late 70s, they began to feel as though they were losing sight of their own needs. They had spent years helping with babysitting, running errands, and offering financial support. But now they realized it was time to focus on their own health, happiness, and personal fulfillment. In a pivotal conversation, Margaret and William explained to their daughters, Emily and Jessica, that while they loved being part of their children's lives, they needed to step back from some caregiving duties. They wanted to travel more and focus on their own well-being. "You both are more than capable of managing your families," Margaret said. "We've helped you for years, and now it's time for us to take care of ourselves." This conversation exemplified the deep love that parents have for their children, but also the importance of recognizing when it's time to step back. By doing so, parents can protect their own happiness while still supporting their adult children in a healthy and sustainable way. This moment of clarity for Margaret and William was pivotal in redefining their roles within the family. By choosing to step back from some of their caregiving duties, they weren't abandoning their children, but instead making room for a healthier dynamic where both parties could thrive independently. They understood that their children, now adults, needed to navigate their own challenges and responsibilities. Margaret and William had provided a lifetime of support, but as they entered their later years, it was time for them to prioritize their own happiness, health, and well-being. This decision wasn't easy, as it required emotional strength and a shift in mindset. For years, they had been the backbone of their family, and the idea of stepping back felt almost foreign. However, once they made the choice to focus on their own needs, they discovered a renewed sense of joy and freedom. The trips they took, the hobbies they rekindled, and the quiet moments spent together allowed them to rediscover who they were outside of the roles they had played as caregivers. Their relationship, once overshadowed by constant responsibilities, now had space to flourish in new ways. The lesson Margaret and William learned, and the lesson they imparted to their daughters, was that true love doesn't always mean giving endlessly. Sometimes, it means recognizing the importance of self-care and knowing when to step back for the sake of everyone's well-being. By setting these boundaries, they ensured that their relationships with Emily and Jessica remained strong, but in a more sustainable and balanced way. Their story is a reminder for all parents that the later years of life should not be defined solely by the responsibilities of caregiving. While the desire to support children is natural, it should never come at the cost of personal fulfillment or health. Parents deserve to enjoy the fruits of their labor, explore new passions, and have the time and space to nurture their own relationships and dreams. By embracing this approach to aging, parents like Margaret and William can continue to love and support their children, but in a way that doesn't deplete their own energy or sense of self. This balance allows for healthier, more enriching family relationships, where both the parents and children are empowered to live their lives fully. And so, as they began to live for themselves again, Margaret and William discovered that stepping back did not diminish their love for their daughters. Instead, it strengthened the bond they shared, making the time they spent together even more meaningful. By prioritizing their own happiness, they ensured that they could continue to be a positive presence in their children's lives, but without losing sight of their own needs. Ultimately, the Turner family found that true love is not about constant sacrifice. It's about knowing when to let go, to allow for both parents and children to grow, and to embrace the next chapter of life with open arms. And as Margaret and William continued to nurture themselves, they found a deeper connection to their children, not just through caregiving, but through shared experiences, understanding, and mutual respect. The lesson is clear. In the golden years of life, it is just as important to care for oneself as it is to care for others. When parents take care of their own needs, they can offer the best of themselves to their families, ensuring that love, joy, and balance remain at the heart of their relationships. If you're still watching and find these lessons meaningful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you're with me on this journey. The conversation wasn't easy. Emily and Jessica, though understanding, initially felt concern about how they would manage without their parents' constant presence. But over time, they came to realize that this change was necessary, not just for Margaret and William's well-being, but also for their own growth as adults and parents. As they reflected on the situation, it became clear that Margaret and William had done so much for their daughters over the years that they had unintentionally prevented them from fully developing the skills needed to manage their households and care for their own children. By stepping back from their role as daily caregivers, Margaret and William weren't abandoning their family. Rather, they were giving Emily and Jessica the space to stand on their own 2 feet. The couple made it clear that they would still be there for emotional support when needed, but their role would no longer involve day-to-day caregiving. This decision, though difficult, allowed both their children and themselves the freedom to grow, mature, and enjoy their lives independently. For Margaret and William, prioritizing their happiness was not an easy transition. They had always seen their role as parents and grandparents as central to their identity. But as they began living more for themselves, they discovered that their relationships with their children and grandchildren grew stronger. They were able to visit their grandchildren without feeling overwhelmed, and their daughters could ask for help when it was truly necessary, without assuming it would always be available. Through this experience, the Turners learned a profound lesson. True parental love does not require constant sacrifice. Instead, it is about nurturing their children's growth, allowing them the space to mature, and knowing when to step back, giving everyone the chance to live more fulfilling lives. By letting go of the caregiving role, parents not only give their children the opportunity to grow and take on their own responsibilities, but they also create space for themselves to experience greater joy, peace of mind, and emotional fulfillment in their later years. Margaret and William's journey serves as an example of how older individuals can approach their golden years with a sense of independence, confidence, and emotional well-being. It teaches that it is possible to maintain loving relationships with children and grandchildren, while ensuring those relationships are based on mutual respect and independence. It is a delicate balance of love, care, and freedom that allows both parents and children to thrive in their own ways, ultimately leading to more fulfilling and peaceful lives for everyone involved. Thank you so much for watching this video. Today we've explored important lessons about setting boundaries, maintaining independence, and understanding the true meaning of parental love. As we age, these lessons aren't just about caregiving. They're also about respecting ourselves and our relationships with others. So what have you learned from this story? Is there something you plan to start practicing in your own life to ensure your golden years are filled with happiness, balance, and fulfillment? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share one thing you've learned today in the comments below, and let us know how you plan to apply it to your own life. If you liked this video, please leave a comment, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful content. Thank you again for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.